looking at entrepreneurship as a necessity at this point. We know that up to 22% of all college graduates will be an entrepreneur at some point in their career, whether they choose to or not. Sometimes it's necessity entrepreneurship.
Life is an endless stream of challenges, but no worries. Manoj is bringing the world's best minds right here for you.
My gosh, Manoj, you just blew my mind.
Thank you, universe. Manoj, thank you.
I'm so grateful.
Makes me feel a little bit better.
Thank you.
Bootstrapping Your Dreams is here to give you what you need to succeed.
Hello and welcome to this new episode of Bootstrapping Your Dreams show. I'm your host Manoj Agarwal, and today we'll be talking with Richard Swart. So Richard is a board and strategic advisor focused on emerging models of AI-driven predictions and decision-making in venture capital and corporate innovation. Richard is one of the world's top experts in family office advising, crowdfunding, and he is a founding member of Silicon Valley Blockchain Society, a global private member-driven ecosystem supporting blockchain projects across industries. His advising and consulting work has included family offices, large funds, major international foundations like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Fortune 50 companies, the World Bank, national governments, and global research institutions. Richard is a SDG Impact Circle Fellow. He is strongly focused on inclusive capital. Richard has held a variety of fellowships, board seats, and research appointments at leading academic institutions such as UC Berkeley and University of Cambridge. In previous academic work, Richard was recognized for work on fintech, alternative finance, and crowd innovation. He is an active member of UN Summit Delegate for Blockchain for Impact. Richard also consults with many companies to mentor their executives on how to leverage the power of networking and build innovative capacity. He's avidly interested in the intersection of science and social graph and how changing social dynamics allow us to collectively solve complex problems. Currently, Richard is advising world-leading blockchain-based financial services companies and is active on several public policy fronts. Awesome. Richard, thank you so much for being with us. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
I appreciate that. It was one long introduction, but
well, you have achieved a lot. So why don't you take us down the memory lane and tell us a little bit about your journey? You have achieved so much in various domains in technology, in business, in public social causes. So can you tell us a little bit about what that journey was like? How did you get started?
I'll give you the most recent version. The last 10 years is probably the most relevant. I went back to graduate school thinking I would become a professor and got my doctorate in information systems. And I thought I would just become a professor of technology. And then a few months after finishing my PhD, I was invited to join a startup. And so to my wife's chagrin, I went from mid-career management, typical life story to a startup. 18 months later, we were acquired. So it was sort of hitting a single in VC parlance, but it certainly got me the interest in and appetite for entrepreneurship. I started a couple of other companies, not as successful as the first. I then realized that there was a significant gap. This is 12, 13 years ago, in how entrepreneurs got resources outside of Silicon Valley. So I basically created my own entrepreneurial network, which became a multi-thousand member network. Through that effort of working with and supporting the efforts of thousands of other entrepreneurs, I was approached by a billionaire who had a vision to support entrepreneurship globally, well, nationally, not globally. Very similar mission to what Steve Case is doing with Rise of the Rest now, but it wasn't Steve, it was somebody else. So for the next 3 years, I ran strategy for this organization that was focused on how to help entrepreneurs basically in flyover cities. So did a lot of work on the public policy front because of that. We then heard about this crazy bill in Congress on crowdfunding, and on behalf of this high net worth individual that I was working for, we spent a massive amount of time and energy sort of creating the pipes and plumbing of this new industry. Crowdfunding didn't really take off, but we spent a lot of time working in public policy. Because of that work, I started getting requests to work with international organizations like Gates and the World Bank. And so I then started doing a lot of work on international policy around entrepreneurship. That then led to an offer to go back into academia. So I ran a research center at UC Berkeley looking at innovations in models of financing entrepreneurship. So not innovation per se, but innovation and financing of innovation. So that was incredibly fun being at Berkeley and learning a lot about sort of best in breed venture capital and best in breed alternative models, which was everything from crowdfunding to tokenization to peer lending to, now it would be crypto if it was still around. So I sort of had this revolving circle of teaching entrepreneurship, public policy, teaching public policy. I keep going in loops. And because of my work at Berkeley, I got pretty integrated into the Bay Area ecosystem, and I've been lucky enough to be part of several interesting companies and projects because of that.
That's great. That's awesome. So, entrepreneurship is something that obviously I'm passionate about, and this bootstrapping your dreams. This podcast is all about entrepreneurship. Have you seen any new trends, especially after the events of 2020, in terms of how people are looking at entrepreneurship as a viable alternative to, say, going into corporate sector and what have you?
It's a mixed story, Manish. We have, excuse me, some people are looking at entrepreneurship as a necessity at this point. We know that up to 22% of all college graduates will be an entrepreneur at some point in their career, whether they choose to or not. Sometimes it's necessity entrepreneurship. But we're seeing a huge interest in what I would call sort of solution-oriented entrepreneurship, ed tech, health tech, med tech, people trying to be entrepreneurs because they see the absolute fracturing of society and the huge healthcare needs that were present. So a lot of people are becoming entrepreneurs because they have their passion activated right now. The challenge is, from a venture capital point of view and from a funding point of view, that a lot of the money is, while the world's awash in money, I would say there's also a tendency for looking for revenue companies, and the risk profile of a lot of venture firms has gone significantly down. So you have an interest in finding projects with traction, which they will support. But I think a lot of venture capitalists are expecting a fairly substantial economic pullback in the next year. So they're trying to keep some dry powder. And so it's an interesting time. I think there's less interest in creating cute consumer apps and more interest in solving real problems.
I see. No, I see that as well. So in terms of public policy, you've been involved in shaping public policy, especially for entrepreneurship. Do you think enough is being done, or there are some things that the government can be doing about encouraging entrepreneurs, or at least facilitating the environment for healthy entrepreneurship?
The short answer is venture debt. There is a huge need for debt financing. There's a lot of economic development work being done, but the amount of money is quite small. You have massive amounts of CRA money floating inside of banks, and that money typically is only allocated towards sometimes affordable housing, sometimes opportunity zones. But there's a misconnection there between redirecting some of the CRA money and some of the economic development money into entrepreneurship, but people are afraid of the risk profile of equity investing. So I think if they were to repivot towards a venture debt model, smaller scale, they could have substantial impact. We know, for example, if you're an African American entrepreneur in America, your odds of getting equity financing are less than 2%.
Yeah.
Now, but a lot of those companies could get smaller debt financing and be able to scale and grow based on that debt financing without seeking venture capital.
Absolutely. And you have done quite a bit of work in venture capital, in private equity, private offices. So how are they looking at this environment, and how are they contributing, or they are sort of gearing up for whatever changes are coming in the economy?
That's another large question. The short answer is most entrepreneurs are not aware of the rise of the power of family offices relative to venture capital firms. Depending on who you talk to, it's approximately a 10-to-1 ratio of money, where family offices have 10 times the amount of assets that venture capital firms have. A lot of families are no longer interested in or willing to pay the 2 and 20 fee structure, let alone a 1 and 10 structure. So I think that there's a increasing tendency of large, wealthy individuals to invest together and do direct investing together. I'm a member of a couple of those networks myself. And you're sort of seeing this rise of family office syndicates as a direct competitor to private equity firms and venture capital firms. Luckily for family offices, they have enough capital they can ride out economic cycles. Venture capital firms are looking oftentimes to create exit events in the near-term horizon, because depending on who you talk to, the econometric models suggest a substantial pullback in the economy 9, 12, 14 months away. So I think you're going to see some more pressure for exits, which are not always great for the entrepreneur. Sometimes they're early and you don't realize the potential value of the firms. But the world's awash in money right now. There's a massive amount of capital floating around the system. So I think that smart entrepreneurs will still be able to find their venture financing. It's out there. But I think if you are on your Series A or Series B, you may start seeing pressure from your board for an M&A or an exit event sooner than you would like.
Yeah. So that's quite an interesting stats, that family offices are much bigger in terms of their investing power rather than venture capital. So do they actually invest directly into companies, early stage companies as well? So what are some of the key differences between venture capital and how family offices operate?
There's two key differences, Manish. The first is that they typically invest in companies that are aligned with operating companies they own or control. So if you are a consumer CPG company, you will probably invest in allied or associated industries. They typically have a very small percentage of venture allocation in their portfolio, 3 to 5% at most. But where they do see is the ability to acquire companies or controlling interest in companies. That's a key differentiation also. They oftentimes want to take over, or at least have substantial management control as opposed to just invest into. They also don't like to invest less than $5 million. So you don't see angel investing equivalents. You probably see Series B and later. So they invest at growth. They don't invest early.
I see. And I mean, I have my own opinions about the venture capital industry and how it operates. But how, let's say, an entrepreneur who's growing and they want to get investment or noticed by these family offices, what will be the channel they go through? Like, it's as you said, like the awareness about the investing power of these family offices doesn't seem to be as prevalent as it's in the venture capital arena. Yeah.
No, I understand the question. It's a very difficult answer. Family offices are very private, and they do get besieged with deal flow. I would say any substantial family office, in my world, substantial is $250 million or more. They probably get 1,000, 2,000 pitches a year, in which they look at a very small number, because they don't have a venture team like a venture firm would. I mean, they certainly have people that are managing their portfolio, but they don't have the same functionality. So you really have to network your way into a family office, and that's typically done through lawyers, wealth managers, private bankers, social ties. You're not going to find, well, you can buy a list of family offices and you can cold call them, and you'll be wasting your money. They will never invest in you if they don't already have a warm introduction from a long-term trusted associate. And there's also concentrations of capital in New York City, Florida, Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, and San Francisco in the United States, London, of course, Dubai, a few other areas. But they're very, very concentrated. And so there are ways of potentially getting into some of those events. But there's definitely a mismatch that occurs where the ones that are easier for the entrepreneurs to get into, family offices typically don't send principals. They may send a junior associate level person to those meetings. When the larger family offices want to get together in a meeting, they don't allow people seeking funding to come. So you really have to go through intermediaries like myself. I'm not offering services. I don't do that. But some sort of a trusted intermediary that can get you into the family. You can't just go pitch at a pitch day. That doesn't exist in the family office industry.
Yeah. All right. That's very useful information, actually. Now let's bring it back to technology a little bit. You've done some impactful work in the field of AI and blockchain. Let's talk about blockchain first. So, where do you see this technology taking us? Crypto is in news all the time these days. Like, what are some of the long-term implications of blockchain, in your opinion, in the industry, in the way that we live, work, and play?
The good news is it's going to be a massive restructuring of the data architecture of the web itself. I mean, talk about Web 3.0, and blockchain is going to power a lot of those changes. I see, and I'm advising a couple of companies in traditional industries like commercial real estate, insurance technology. I'm aware of one group that's pushing one of the stock exchanges into a blockchain architecture to run all of the stock exchange, a major stock exchange. So the financial services industry, the healthcare industry are the two main points we are going to see fast adoption of blockchain. Don Tapscott makes a claim in his TED Talk that more money will be made through blockchain technology than the entire history of the internet to date. That's a pretty audacious claim that he makes. But I do see the opportunity for massive economies of scale and cost reductions across, real estate, title search, insurance contracts, settlements, any sort of cumbersome process where there's a massive amount of semi-structured data. I see blockchain having a huge application for. The challenge that most people are not addressing in blockchain is the threat of quantum supremacy, where you have the rise of quantum computing. And we're already seeing, constant cyber warfare between America, China, and Russia and other entities. As the quantum computing gets more and more advanced, it's going to fundamentally alter the cryptographic security of these networks. And so I think you're going to see a bit of a pullback as quantum grows until they figure out how to add quantum proof encryption into their models. And that's not going to be a trivial task.
Yeah. So it sounds like it will have a lot of impact on industries, but maybe many people are just getting a little bit ahead until the dust settles and all the technologies sort of mature. Is that?
No, I think that the larger institutions, as you see, the largest patent holders are U.S. banks. I mean, the large financial institutions have recognized the power and the cost savings. You're starting to see adoption inside of insurance. Cushman & Wakefield has a large investment in one company, Invenium, I believe it's called, that looks at commercial real estate transactions on the blockchain. So you're seeing a major push of large multi-billion-dollar financial institutions towards blockchain as a cost saving for their internal operations. They're not ahead of it, they're leading the way. I do think smaller entrepreneurs that don't have the ability to bring in a lot of security engineers and truly understand all the ramifications of how these technologies interact. Yeah, I mean, maybe you can launch a company and get it acquired quickly, the build to be sold model. But I do think it's going to require some pretty sophisticated engineering and cryptographic talent that a lot of small startups are just not able to afford.
You are listening to Bootstrapping Your Dreams Show with Manoj Agarwal. Businesses face numerous challenges like finding the right product market fit, determining the market size, implementing a winning go-to-market strategy, crafting customer-centric USP, competitive analysis, looking for funding, building up cash flow and profitability. We have made a lot of free resources available to the entrepreneurial community, including this podcast. We invite you to check out our websites and follow us on social channels. The links are in the show notes. We hope you find the resources useful and utilize them to grow your business. We also have some programs for entrepreneurs. If you find our content useful, then you will definitely find the programs outstanding. So do check them out. What about, in terms of scalability, because blockchain, obviously, speaking in terms of crypto and all that, there's a lot of there's a lot of sort of concern about scalability. How long does a transaction take? And then when we talk about cryptocurrencies, there's a lot of talk about environmental impact because
massive impact.
Yeah. So what are your views around that in terms of scalability and the long-term environmental impact of blockchain?
Scalability is a massive problem. Some transactions are taking 8, 9, 10 hours to clear now. And the theory, of course, is it would be handled in a matter of milliseconds. So there's a massive challenge of the demands on the networks. The distributed nodal model of the system actually builds in massive redundancies and also builds in massive consumption of energy and waste. I'm not a cryptographer, I'm not a computer engineer, so I don't have any specific opinion as to which particular solution set is best. But I do think that there needs to be some fundamental re-engineering for this to be adopted. I was on a phone call yesterday with the University of Cambridge, and the University of Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance has a blockchain environmental impact index that has become the default or the de facto standard that we use to look at environmental impact. And it really took off when Elon Musk started referencing it. But it's concerning when you have, some small mining operations, some large mining operations consuming more electricity than small nations.
Yeah.
So the current architecture is not sustainable. There has to be a change now. With proof of stake mechanisms and some other changes, they may be able to reduce the energy consumption. Now, the counter to that, of course, if you have large distributed networks like major banks and major financial institutions using the same architecture and already using the computing power they have inside these institutions, they can, if you will, grease the skids and get a lot of those transactions done, not effortlessly, but much more efficiently. But smaller companies or just crypto at large, especially cryptocurrencies, I think you're going to see a pretty large pullback as people start to deal with ramifications of the environmental impacts.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting and something to watch for. Now, another technology that you've had a huge impact with is artificial intelligence, and obviously, my company focuses heavily on artificial intelligence, and I think we share a little bit of a unique interest where you also have some interest in how to use AI to help human beings make decisions and such. And we focus a little bit on human psychology and how we can impact it using artificial intelligence. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? Like how does artificial intelligence, how can we utilize in day-to-day human interactions, and how can it be instrumental in sort of helping us make decisions and things which generally are not associated with the technology or artificial intelligence itself?
No, it's a great question, Manoj. Some of the companies that I'm a long-term advisor to is called CrowdSmart.ai, and they're probably the industry leader at using what's called human collective intelligence for decision making. So most of the time when you think about artificial intelligence, you're thinking about looking for a signal inside a massive amount of noise. You have financial data, transaction data, credit risk analysis, consumer buying behavior. It's a massive pool of data, and you have structured data, and you just let the neural network go to town. And you try to find some signal in there. What our approach inside of CrowdSmart is that you apply the expert opinions of 10, 12, 15, 20 humans around making a prediction about a future unknown event. Now, we trained our model and originally had our own venture capital fund where we were using our own technology for early stage venture. And there is no data in early stage venture. You're making a prediction with a very limited set of data. We then realized that the technology was much more broadly applicable. So we're talking to intelligence analysts inside DoD and three-letter agencies outside the U.S. and inside the U.S., M&A teams, forecasting teams, risk management teams. There's all sorts of applications where you have a critical decision in a limited set of data. So the challenge is how can you collect human reasoning and then have an AI system running in the background to make sense of the human reasoning. So what our system does is it's using semantic analysis, NLP, and it builds a Bayesian belief network. I don't have time to unpack all that for your audience, but it basically starts to understand the way that humans are thinking and then how humans are reacting to and responding to each other. So the problem with a survey or a focus group is you just have a small amount of data in a limited period of time. And like in survey, the joke is, I wish you would ask me another question. You only are allowed to answer the questions that are presented. And even with some open stimulus question at the end, you don't really get new ideas evolving. Our technology allows a group, let's call it 10 for the sake of argument, people asynchronously to be on a platform and looking at and evaluating a question or a set of questions. And then it shows you the reasoning of others, and the system builds for divergence first. So we try to push you to look at ideas you may not have considered. And then it starts to build convergence, and we actually are able to build predictions about outcomes based on knowledge of the relevancy and the efficacy of the input that's provided. Now, we also do it in a single blind way, which means that you don't know who else you're interacting with. And so one of our customers is University of California Endowment System, and they're running private equity level deals through the technology. What they're really looking at is less necessarily the outcome of that investment decision is how their team makes a decision, what factors are being considered, what reasons actually surface and drive decision making inside of a team. And it also shows you which members actually contribute the most value to a decision. And oftentimes what you find is that social status or income, like the highest paid person in the room phenomenon, doesn't necessarily correlate to having better ideas. We're working with one organization of CEOs like, nobody likes my ideas any longer. And we're saying, well, yes, because if you actually evaluate the intellectual contribution in your ideas, and they don't know that you're the CEO, you're going to get honest feedback. When you present an idea in a boardroom, your employees are going to nod and say yes. So what technology takes away are the multiple layers of bias and how decisions are made. And that's racial bias, gender bias, confirmation bias. And it actually drives towards better decision making. So it's a not a radical approach, because people have been playing at this intersection of artificial intelligence and human reasoning. Thomas Malone at MIT has a Center for Collective Intelligence. It's a pretty small set of research that there's more and more interest in, almost like reinventing decision support systems from the 80s and the 90s, and bringing them into the current world with much better AI. And our founding team has been working on these technologies for over 20 years in different versions of different applications. So it's a way of basically saying, can computers make humans reason and think better together? And we believe we can.
That's amazing. That's awesome. And so it sounds like we are sort of approaching that point that we always see in Hollywood movies, where machines and human minds start to fuse, and in some cases AI starts to take over humans. And there's obviously a lot of chatter about that, AI affecting jobs and the negative impact of AI on society. What are some of your views? How do you see the future being impacted by AI as these technologies mature and we start to rely on them more and more?
I'm not a futurist, but I've been to a lot of conferences and done a lot of thinking about how AI is going to affect huge numbers of jobs. And I think that can't give the specific example because I've disclosed the company, but one company I was talking to just this week said that the new system they're bringing on board is going to replace 100 humans with one system, and it's going to decrease the time to arrive at a decision by about 100-fold. So you have 100 times decrease in capital labor costs and a 100 times process improvement. That mathematics does not bode well for college students, right? So I, even my own children, I'm saying you need to learn AI and data science. Just as a father, I'm saying this is something that you need to understand. Now, there is going to be a substantial decrease in the need for, if you will, mid-level functionaries inside of organizations, and a lot of work that's currently being done by humans is going to be done by AI. And it's, there's a lot of political ramifications and societal ramifications of that statement, but it's just a fact. And I think that AI is getting frighteningly accurate in a lot of ways, and it's still very stupid in other ways. But I was recently invited to a task force inside the Department of Commerce looking at AI and ethics. And there's a huge amount of concern about over-reliance upon these systems. And so so I guess this whole question really devolves to, can AI help humans make better decisions? And I think it'd be interesting to see, can AI make humans make better decisions about how to use AI? It's hopefully a frontier that's not being developed yet.
That's very interesting. I mean, I think about this quite a bit, and in my opinion, most of the world is not really aware of the kind of changes that are about to happen in the next decade or so. And I think it used to be that people used to think that, the singularity event is like 5 decades away, but I think it is on the horizon very, very soon. So let's take it one step further. What are your views about that? Like, what are your views about AGI, and when do you think we will see general artificial intelligence come on the horizon?
Dr. Keller, who's the founder of CrowdSmart, he's been doing AI since the 1960s. He was the chairman of the first AI company to go public in the 1980s. So he's got, 50 years of AI experience. And his joke is everybody believes that it's 10 years away, and they've always believed it's 10 years away in every generation.
Yeah.
So he has much more experience than I do. I still think that it's quite a ways away, but do I think it's 25 or more years away? No. Do I think it's imminent? No, but it's near term enough that I think that my kids who are still in elementary school will probably experience it early in their careers. I think the vast majority of people do not understand at all the implication of what we're discussing. And when you start also talking about the dramatic increase in quantum computing that we're seeing, you combine those two technologies and you're talking about a level of intelligence which literally we won't understand how the systems are functioning. We won't understand how decisions are being made. We won't be able to unpack them. So it's a black box that's far superior and far smarter than any human can be. And that's already happening in some situations where the AI is coming up with novel solutions to problems using assumptions that no scientist or engineer has ever modeled, but they're accurate solutions. So
no, absolutely.
Literally, the AI is already outsmarting us in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. No, I saw today IBM, I believe they released like a personal computer size, a quantum computer which can sort of in the form factor of a personal computer, which is already becoming a reality.
Yeah.
So that's people need to be prepared. So let me ask you this question: how should people prepare themselves? You touched upon this very, very briefly. What can they do specifically to get prepared for the future, for the next decade or so, in terms of their ability to grow professionally and personally?
Well, I think you're going to see a divergence into two very distinct camps. You're going to still see a need for humans to interact with humans, whether that's nursing or psychotherapy or training. An AI system, with my apologies to AR/VR advocates, I still think you need human interaction in a lot of ways. So I think that people with high EQ and people that have an interest in an ability to work in more of an interpersonal setting should, become extremely good at whatever it is they do. But I think if you are entering college right now and thinking of majoring in computer science or finance, or and you're not looking at the role of AI, you're not looking at blockchain, I think you're missing the boat. And I think we're going to see a dramatic decrease in the need for a lot of employees. That becomes a very frightening situation for the world if all of a sudden 50, 60, 70% of people around the world aren't needed in jobs.
Absolutely.
And that's not impossible to imagine that happening within our lifetimes, if not the next 20 years.
That's amazing. All right, and then one final question I ask everyone is that you obviously have had a tremendous career, a lot of success. What kind of role did any mentor, did you have any mentors, and if so, what kind of role did they play in your success, in your journey?
Oh, I've certainly had a couple. It's hard to pick one, but I guess the best I had was as an academic. The dean of one of the colleges took me under his wing, and he basically told me to get out of academia. He said that he thought I had worked for Bain or Boston Consulting Group, and I had not, but he thought I'd already had that experience. And he said, the way your mind operates, you really need to be somewhere where your skill set will be recognized and rewarded, and academia probably isn't the best setting for that, which is not an attack on academia. It's just a personality mismatch, job function discussion. So having somebody willing to tell you that. In fact, I had another conversation with the dean of the Yale School of Management. I wasn't at Yale, but I met him in a social situation, and he and I met several times. And he predicted within a year and a half of my starting at Berkeley that our center would collapse and it would be time to move on. So this having people that are willing to be truth tellers in your lives and inviting people to give you that hard feedback and be willing to act upon that hard feedback, that takes a level of emotional maturity which can be difficult to acquire. But that's an important role. I always invite people to tell me where I'm making mistakes. So not like a personal board of directors, but I certainly have been explicitly invited people to be very critical and direct with me. And that's been very helpful. Then I have one individual who basically gave me the push to get off the national stage and go internationally, and basically gave me enough confidence to branch out. And that happened in my 30s. So sometimes mentors give you feedback, and sometimes mentors give you a shove, I guess.
Yeah.
I think you sometimes need both.
That's great. Great advice. Well, thank you so much for being with us. This has been a very interesting conversation. We touched upon some really esoteric topics, which are very, very important for people to at least be aware of. So thank you so much for sharing your views. Now, before I let you go, can you tell us, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
I'm very old-fashioned. I got so frustrated and annoyed with social media, I basically quit everything other than LinkedIn. My personal website is richardswart.com.
Okay.
You can always contact me through that function. But I don't have a Twitter following. I don't have an Instagram account. I found that I was spending way too much of my life interacting with people around topics I didn't choose to discuss. So
Yeah.
very old school. So you can email me, or you can use my website. And most of my clients these days are family offices or global institutions. But if there's some way I can be helpful, probably the best way would be to send me a message on LinkedIn.
Awesome. We'll put those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you.
Happy to do so. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Sarah, producer of the Bootstrapping Your Dreams show. This episode has come to an end. Don't forget to check out the episode show notes for the links to the resources mentioned in this episode. Thanks for tuning in. Until the next episode, goodbye. Keep going and keep winning.